What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. Here to help me break everything down from at the tight end position, it's Brian Twining. What's up, Brian?
What's up, Kyle? This has been the bane of my existence in fantasy football for years. It's either you get the top guys or you're literally playing roulette with your fantasy football life from week to week.
Tight end may be my favorite position. I love drafting tight ends. I love drafting multiple tight ends. But yes, I am also with you. We can talk a little strategy here off the top, but there really seems like, and I think we've been simpatico when we've talked about this before, but it's either get one of the top guys or wait until the very end, because the difference between tight end 6, 7, 8, this year I think maybe I might be a little more aggressive, but we can talk about that as we go through our rankings of our top guys and kind of talk about that. But Brian, before we talk the rest of the position, I think for me, there's two names that are in consideration for there's one name for sure that's a slam dunk first round pick. There's another name for me that's right in that, if I have a turn, say the end of the first, early second, would be heavily in consideration. A third name has been getting a little hype and a little buzz in terms of Darren Waller. So Travis Kelce, slam dunk, first round pick. The Scott Fishbowl tight end premium. It took him 102. So that's how I feel about Travis Kelce. I think he is absolutely a difference maker. The difference between him and any other tight end, while a Waller or a George Kittle, who are the other two names I think that are in this conversation, are incredible, and I would not fault anyone who took them round 2, round 3, just because of that volume. For me, it's Travis Kelce as a slam dunk first round pick. You look at what he does year in and year out. Last year, he produced 207.8 points in standard. If we go to half PPR, he was 260.3. If you compare that to wide receivers, he is only trailing Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. He would have been your wide receiver 4. And when you're able to put that guy, in a tight end slot, like that's a game changer. That's a difference maker. That's how you win fantasy titles.
Yeah, so I equated the tight end position last year to what catcher is to fantasy baseball, because for the longest time in baseball, if you had, say, Gary Sanchez at the very beginning of his career, Salvador Perez, guys that were hitting home runs, you had a leg up on everybody day to day, or in football week to week. You're getting you're outscoring your opponent's tight end unless they have their career game, guaranteed by at least 5 to 7 points on a week to week basis, and then you can fill in the rest of your lineup with guys that are probably equal to what everyone else has. So yes, tight end is the position that if you can get one, especially Travis Kelce, he's totally worth the price that you're paying.
And he's been the dominant name at the tight end position for several years now. There was a run where, it was kind of changing hands, whether it was Zach Ertz one year, different names kind of jumping up. But Kelce's been the guy. And if you go back 2018, 2019, he was a top 10 option at the position. And 2018, he would have been like top 7. That's just too hard for me to pass on. So when I'm considering a tight end, that like, honestly, I'm looking at, I'm looking at half point ADP. I'll pull up all the positions instead of just tight end. But he's currently going off the board as the 9th overall pick. I would take him in front of Nick Chubb, who's going one pick in front of him. Beyond there, it would be hard for me. Like I don't know about Zeke would be a tough one. It's hard to, we talked running back. I think when you're talking Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, like I hate taking running backs early, but like at that point, it would be hard for me unless it was a tight end premium or something like that where it get a little bit of a boost. In that case, I think he's worth a top 2 or 3 pick.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned Jonathan Taylor there, because for me, a guy like Taylor, who you know for sure is going to probably get the goal line carries, and this offense should see a little bit of an uptick in production with Carson Wentz. I think just based on his like athletic ability and them probably going towards more of a downfield kind of passing attack. But if this was a full PPR league, I'd probably lean Travis Kelce
Yeah,
over a Jonathan Taylor, because Marlon Mack is coming back for the Colts. And I just don't see a world where Indianapolis is just going to say, okay, 90% of the touches and 70% of the receptions out of the backfield are going to Taylor. So
I think we're gonna have a discussion because as the off seasons rolled along, as I prepared for Scott Fishbowl, as we prepare to do all of the stuff we're going to be doing heading into the season. There's a few names that are starting for me that I'm starting to come around a lot more on, and Jonathan Taylor is absolutely one of those guys. I'm enamored with that offensive line. And I was not a Jonathan Taylor guy, so for me to come around on him is pretty big. But the offensive line, the addition of Carson Wentz, Marlon Mack's return, and Naheem Hines in a very specific role are going to be a little more annoying than I think people want to admit. But I also expect this offense to be a lot better than I think Vegas and fantasy owners are giving it credit. And I expect him to have a really, really strong season. I expect him to get 80% of the work on the ground and be involved in the passing game with Mac and Hines sprinkled in at times. But he's definitely someone I've grown a lot more on. But yeah, I mean, honestly, in any sort of if full PPR, I would take him probably 104, 105 range, and then any half or standard. I think Taylor would jump him. It would be really hard for me to pass on him for Saquon, for Kamara, for Elliott. And as much as I love Tyreek and Devontae Adams and some of these receivers, I think I would take Kelce and then hope to get Calvin Ridley or DK Metcalf or AJ Brown or somebody in round two.
yeah, I mean, like you said at the beginning of the show, the fall off from Travis Kelce and George Kittle or Darren Waller, whichever one you want to pick, to the next group of guys
Mm-hmm.
is like Mount Everest, as opposed to somebody climbing the hill in their backyard,
Right.
from Jonathan Taylor, Alvin Kamara, Zeke, Chubb to Austin Eckler, Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson. I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, you're gonna prioritize something that gives you a advantage on a week to week basis, especially in season long. This is not, DFS where you're just trying to make the best lineup that week. It's season long. You need a weekly advantage over your opponent.
So for you, is there a tier break? Is it Travis Kelce in a world of his own, and then who I guess who would be number two, or is there someone else in that same tier where you'd say, I would be comfortable taking them, even if it's the end of maybe a couple picks later, the end of the first, early second, or like where are you at with kind of the next name or two at the position?
So originally I had it set with the top three guys in their own tier, but
Mhm.
looking at it further, I do think that Travis Kelce has kind of become that unicorn of the group, and
Yeah.
so it's Travis Kelce, and then for me Darren Waller next, and then George Kittle, based
Okay.
on the fact that Kittle won't have the scoring share that Kelce will, knowing that San Francisco wants to keep the ball on the ground. They have Brandon Ayuk, they have Debo Samuel, and Darren Waller. I mean, I don't even know what the Raiders do half the time in the red zone. He's kind of like the Julio Jones at the tight end position. He gets looked at in between the 20s, get him there, and then it's seemingly Derek Carr doesn't want to give the ball to Waller in the end zone. So I think his limited scoring opportunities prevent him from reaching that Travis Kelce type level.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you look at his targets over the last 2 years, 117 and then 145 last year, which is insane.
Yeah.
Um, but the Kittle injury was concerning last year, and a big part of I think why there seems to be a pessimism about him kind of across the board. Kittle is my number two guy, and as like you said, I initially had him in a tier with Kelce. I think I'm going to have to change that, but I also think that means for the next names, I think I might have to tweak that too. because there's two names that I'm interested in, and I would be considering drafting earlier than the kind of the rest. But I still think there's a clear advantage, especially as you mentioned with the volume. Now, I'm a little more optimistic on Kittle kind of just walking back into his volume, seeing north of 100 targets, probably closer to 120 or so. Um, Now, that could I'm optimistic on what Trey Lance could be, and I'm optimistic on what that volume could be. But a rookie quarterback leaning on a pass catcher like George Kittle, an offense that runs so heavily through him, and then if it's Jimmy G, then I still think that's his guy, right? And as much as I love what IU can be, and as much as I love what Debo can be, and we'll figure out the running game, whether that's Trey Sermon, whether that's Raheem the Dream, whether that's some combo like we've seen the past 3 years with the Niners, where it's just kind of a rotation of guys.
Yep.
But I think George Kittle is so important. But from a real football standpoint, his blocking is insanely important to what they do at the
Yes.
running game, to keeping him healthy. Maybe Shanahan schemes it so he gets 105 targets, and then if Waller's seeing, even if you say he pulls back a little bit and he's 125, 130, that's just such a difference. But as you mentioned too, the touchdown upside with Darren Waller seems to be a little capped with kind of um, what the Raiders do. Now, he had 9 touchdowns last year, which is a great sign, but before that it was 3, before that it was 0, before that it was 2, where George Kittle, tends to have a few more. So I think his kind of floor in a season, assuming he plays 16 games, is 5 or 6 or 7, where Waller could easily score a couple. And we'll see what that Raiders offense looks like. I think there's a lot of interesting pieces at work there, but I think Waller and Kittle are very clearly that next tier, and you can rank them however you decide. I would prefer Kittle, Brian prefer Waller, but if you had it the other way, I wouldn't fault you at all. Now, from an overall perspective, where are you considering taking these guys off of the board? Because if we head over to Fantasy Football Calculator, Darren Waller's and George Kittle are kind of that between the end of the first and the end of the second. Their ADPs kind of put them. Let's see where are we at right here. Yeah, let me pull up the overall just so I can kind of get a better idea. Yes, so overall per on a half point scoring, Darren Waller is 209 as the 21st overall, and then Kittle is 212 at 25th overall. So kind of mid to end of the second. Is that an area where you're comfortable taking either of these guys, or is that a position where there's too many other names that you're looking at that you're like, yeah, I can't right there?
I think for me, it's definitely going to be predicated on what I did with my first pick and where I actually started the draft from. For instance, if I had 101 and I took Christian McCaffrey, and I'm looking at the potential of adding Darren Waller to my Christian McCaffrey,
Yeah.
I think that's the move because I mean, when you look at the wide receivers that would be available to you still, that's your next pick, you're looking at like a Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson, all wide receiver ones still on the board.
Right.
Or
Or
you
you
can
could
pair.
even, in a perfect world, you're hitting, you're at that turn, you're grabbing Calvin Ridley and Darren Waller, you're grabbing AJ Brown and Darren Waller, Justin Jefferson and Darren Waller, whoever
Oh, I
happened to make it there and whoever is your kind of,
yep. I
favorite
forgot that
option of
was
the
the back
group.
to backs.
Or you grab a running back that you like, Clyde
Yep.
Edwards-Helaire, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift, whatever. Yeah, I think in that scenario, I think if you can lock in one of the elite names at the position, and you're still locking in a couple studs that you really like, I think that makes a ton of sense. Now, if you're in the middle and you drafted, Alvin Kamara or Zeke or maybe Tyreek Hill, and now you're coming back and you can take one of the tight ends, but you're also potentially missing out on Antonio Gibson or Joe Mixon or Cam Akers, whoever you happen to like out of that running back group. Are you a little more hesitant at that point?
If I went wide receiver with my first pick, I'm
Mm-hmm.
either probably stacking it with another wide receiver tight end, or I if a running back were to fall, like an Austin Eckler, potentially, I would grab him. But more than likely, I'm going to go pass catchers early and just punt on running back and go RB, zero RB, whatever the hell we're calling it nowadays,
Yeah.
and just try to get value later in the draft at that position. So I would look at Waller with my second, and even
Okay.
potentially George Kittle.
Yeah, I would be comfortable taking Kittle in both of those scenarios. Darren Waller, it would be tough for me. I'm in Northern California. I play with a ton of 49ers fans. So George Kittle tends to go a little earlier.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, if I'm looking at Darren Waller as kind of the next option, I might have a hard time getting there when I could grab, in theory, I could grab an AJ Brown and Calvin Ridley, or I could grab Calvin Ridley and Justin Jefferson. Like, if I'm able to do that now, if I started Tyreek Hill with my first pick, then I might be a little more comfortable grabbing one of the tight ends and kind of moving on from there. But if I, modified zero RB, whatever you want to call it, started with a workhorse, whether that's Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry, and then I would probably want to double tap wide receivers and be a lot more patient at the position.
Now, I will admit the fact that I'm saying that I would consider Darren Waller or George Kittle. In all likelihood, quite honestly, I'm probably not taking a tight
Yeah.
end at that position because I don't think I've ever drafted a tight end prior to round 4 in my
Mm.
entire, I mean, we're going on 14, 15 years of playing fantasy football. And that's just, that it's probably that old geezer kind of mentality in me. Like, you just don't take that position that early. But for instance, last year I got Darren Waller at the turn pick, at the first pick in the 5th round. So
Yeah.
like that just fell to me. And in that next group of guys that we were talking about, guys like TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Noah Fant, Kyle Pitts, those are all guys that could potentially give you, 6 to 8 touchdowns at around like 50 to 65 receptions, which if you can get them in round 7 or 8, potentially, depending on if they fall, like, I would much rather take that value than potentially miss on my first running back that is a steal if they were to fall.
So last year I took Travis Kelce in the first round in a lot of drafts, and it worked out fantastically. I would be happy to do it again. And to be honest with you, depending on the league, your league's better than anybody, so you're
Yeah.
going to have a good idea. Know your draft room. That's one of my biggest things. Is
Yes.
if you're walking into a new league, maybe you won't be able to do that, but you have an idea. Okay, I'm in a league with 49ers and Raiders fans. Those players are just going to intrinsically go a little bit earlier. I'm
Yep.
going to be in a league with teams that play owners that like to draft running back early. So I know I'm going to be able to get receivers later. That kind of stuff is really important. But I don't hate. I have the turn pick, and I grab Travis Kelce at 110, 111, 112, whatever it is, coming around and grabbing the other tight end you like, because you can play him in a flex. Now that puts you in a little bit of a bind because you aren't as flexible. But that is a strategy I do believe in. I do believe it could work, even though sometimes my league mates tend to scream at me and say that's physically impossible to win.
They probably think you're monopolizing the league
Oh
too
yeah,
by
no,
taking the two best
my league
options.
mates have some takes. It's fun. I really would like to record some of their thoughts because
All home leagues are like
they
that.
yeah that's what makes home leagues the best.
Yep.
Everybody has thoughts, and some people still think it's like 2004 and they have to draft 7 running backs or else it's impossible to win. And that's the story for another day. So let's talk about that next tier, Brian. For me, there's 2 names that jump out above the rest. It's Mark Andrews and it's TJ Hawkinson. From a volume standpoint, from a focus of the offense standpoint, from a touchdown potential upside standpoint, those 2 names are incredibly interesting. I think people are going to sleep a little bit on the Lions. I know Jared Goff is quote unquote terrible, and it's going to be a little bit weird there, but I think there's enough room for Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift and even Jared Goff to be interesting. And Hawkinson and Andrews, I've been going back and forth. I think I like Andrews more now, but you could talk to me tomorrow and I could be TJ Hawkinson just because of that volume. Because we've seen with like what the Raiders do, how important that funneling of targets can be. So if
Yep.
you're talking about Hawkinson all of a sudden emerging into that 105 or 115 target plateau, um, this is a guy that could finish top 2 or 3 at the position.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about the fact that their head coach is a former tight end himself. So
Yep.
it, I there's no doubt in my mind that Dan Campbell knows that TJ Hawkinson is probably their most versatile and probably best receiving threat on the team, on the outside. Um, I do think you see a slight uptick in the way that they use Hawkinson. They split him out wide a little bit more. They get him on those kind of Travis Kelce type tight end screen plays where he can use his athleticism against smaller defenders. So I do like Hawkinson, especially with Jared Goff. We saw him kind of pepper his tight ends.
Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett both had a ton of potential and a ton
Yes,
of big fantasy games, and now we don't have to worry about picking guys. It's just there. He's the
it's just
option.
one guy.
It's like one option. It's like Higbee and Everett became one player, and now all those targets can go that way. And he doesn't have Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp to deal with.
Yes. And for as bad as we think Detroit's going to be, and all the kind of data predictions are saying they're going to be one of the low scoring teams in the NFL, that offensive line isn't terrible. So it's not
No,
like Jared Goff's going to be under heavy pressure all game. I mean, he's going to have some time back there, and if he can get Hawkinson one on one against slower linebackers or smaller DBs, I mean, you're looking at a weekly mismatch and on the field and potentially in fantasy where he could be this year's kind of Darren Waller
yep.
surprise where he kind of jumps into that next tier of guys.
So beyond there, is there anyone in that tier for you?
I mean, I guess I could get on the Kyle Pitts train, but I just don't know how they're going to utilize him yet. I don't envision him playing a traditional tight end position. I see him more kind of spread out in the
I think
slot.
he's going to be a versatile player. I think Julio Jones no longer being there opens up a lot of volume for him, and he's another guy that I've become a lot more interested in, especially like when I'm doing these best ball drafts, whether it's underdog or whatever. I find myself gravitating towards like a start where I grab him and Ridley and Matt Ryan and kind of build that stack out and really enjoy kind of what that upside could be. Now, like with quarterback, in most leagues where most teams are holding really one tight end, maybe two, you're going to be able to see, okay, Kyle Pitts is not getting the work that we expected, or it's just not consistent enough. There's going to be 3 weeks where he goes for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then the rest of the season he's going to be kind of a ghost. I think because of the draft capital they used and because of the potential in that offense, that I don't expect that to happen, but that is a reality.
Yeah.
But you're able to say, okay, well, that's not the answer. And that's when you get to streaming, or that's where you go pick up the flavor of the week off the waiver wire and kind of ride that for a while. So I'm a lot more when it comes to quarterbacks and when it comes to tight ends, shoot for the moon. And if it doesn't work out, then kind of pivot and go from there.
Yeah, I understand that kind of vantage point, but for me, like a guy like Kyle Pitts, for instance, the fever that people have for this dude is, I mean, it's crazy. He's going right now. He's 53rd overall, 505 right now, going off the board as the fifth tight end. And if we do live in a world where the reality is where he has those boom weeks, but the rest of the time it's 3-4 receptions for like 40 yards and no touchdowns, you just passed up on all sorts of value at other positions like wide receiver where you're seeing more consistent volume. I mean, looking in that range, you're looking at a Cooper Kupp, a Kenny Galladay, a Deontay Johnson, an Odell Beckham Jr. who could be on the uptick in terms of what he's able to
Yeah.
do this year. So I don't know if I could pay up for a Kyle Pitts in that range this season, just kind of knowing what Atlanta having a lot of turnover at the coaching staff. With that said, I will say one thing. Tennessee funneled their targets very slim to a couple of guys. It was
Yep. And Arthur
AJ
Smith,
Brown.
now their
Yeah,
coach.
yeah. So there is also a reality where it's Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley, and that's it. Getting
Yeah,
the
Mike
receptions.
Davis.
So
Yeah.
it's whether or not you want to take the risk of him being a boom or you're going to have to punt early.
I could absolutely see Mike Davis as Derrick Henry, super super light. Like don't get me don't get mistaken that I'm saying Mike Davis is going to be an RB1, but like seeing the majority of the running back touches, And then Calvin Ridley seeing 150 targets. That's why I'm getting a lot more excited on him. And then Kyle Pitts seeing a bunch of volume. And then a smattering of Hayden Hurst and Zacchaeus and Russell Gage and
Yeah.
those kind of names. We'll see how good the Falcons can be and what their defense might look like. They might not have a choice. They might have to throw a little bit more than we and kind of mix in a few other names. But yeah, that's why I'm a lot more excited, kind of in general, on the Falcons for both Ridley and for Pitts. But yeah, I don't envision myself in redraft adding a ton of him just because of all those names that you're talking about there. Now, if I start receiver heavy and the running backs that I really want to add aren't there, then maybe someone like Kyle Pitts becomes interesting. But I feel like if Pitts is on the board and I'm really considering him, Hawkinson and or Andrews will be there, and I'd rather go with those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, and you're likely saving a round of draft capital for them as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so for me, there's a clear tier break there. And then we get into a mix of names that are interesting and that I'm hoping are sitting there when I'm ready to select a tight end. So for me, the next group is Robert Tonyan, Dallas Goedert, Noah Fant, Jonnu Smith, Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts, Logan Thomas, Mike Gesicki, and Irv Smith. And I would be happy with any of those guys as my tight end heading into the season. And a big part of why, if I don't get Kelce and or Kittle, I'm probably going to wait.
Yeah, I mean, you just said a bunch of guys, and for me, there's a part of me that thinks that Jared Cook taking over for the Chargers could wind up being a weekly tight end one in that offense, knowing that they really only have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on the outside.
Yep.
And so it's almost to the point now where are we expecting Robert Tonyan to have 2-3 touchdown games again? So,
No.
I mean,
but the return of Aaron Rodgers, seemingly seems like he's coming back. All signs point to him not retiring.
Also, remember, I don't know how much of an impact it's going to make. Devin Funchess is going to play this year for the Packers.
Is he playing left tackle for them? Because they need offensive line. That's about all he can do.
Hey, he was a great tight end at Michigan before he transitioned.
He was a wide receiver at Michigan, and he was awesome. And then he did nothing in the NFL. But yeah, I was not a believer in Tonyan, but he did a lot of things that makes me think he could be a guy that is a weekly interesting option. Now, do I think there's some regression in the tight end or the touchdown? Sure. But I expect his volume and his receiving yards and that kind of stuff to be a thing, because I think, even, as much as we talk about Aaron Rodgers hates tight ends, I think outside of Devontae Adams, like, who else as a pass catcher do you feel really good about? Like, I don't feel good about St. Brown or Alan Lazard or
even the Lizard King. No.
Yeah, like I feel like his weekly, like, I feel like 4, 5, 6, especially in PPR, 4, 5, 6 catches a week. And then maybe, 5 or 6 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns by the end of the season. I feel like that's a really reasonable outcome and something that, if he's sitting there for me in round 12 and I need a tight end and he's kind of the last guy of the group, I'm fine drafting him. Now, of the guys that, if you're looking for a little more upside, I think Noah Fant in Denver could make a ton of sense. Especially if Teddy starts.
He's a physical freak, by the way.
Especially if Teddy starts. I really like him. And I like Evan Ingram. I know he's been a guy that's injured, but guess what? He played 16 games, started 14 of them last year, and we'll talk some of our bold predictions at some point. But I'm a lot more optimistic on the Giants' offense as a whole. Just put it that way.
Well, I think the Giants could be one of the surprise teams in the NFL, because I loved what they did on defense.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Judge is, I mean, much like Brian Flores, seems to kind of know what he's doing as a head coach. He's not just a facade, or it's not a charade with him. Like, he's got football knowledge over there, and they have a nice core of defensive players over there in at the Meadowlands.
Garrett, which, while we can really question what the Clapper does from the head coaching position,
yes,
he can coach up some offense and scheme some stuff up and make a lot of things work. And I think he's somebody that I'm A lot more optimistic about in year two.
Yeah, I've also really liked Evan Ingram. It's just, I mean, last year, like you said, he played in all 16 games. He had 63 receptions for 650 yards. He only scored one touchdown.
Yep.
With the return of Saquon Barkley, do we think New York is going to try to get cute and avoid giving the ball to their absolute freaking monster in the backfield? It's just hard for me to envision him seeing anything more than 3 to 5 touchdowns max, especially with Kenny Golladay there now. So he's kind of a guy at the back end. Like, he would be a dude that I'd be okay taking with the last pick in my draft as like to start my at the position. No
Mm.
longer is he in that like 7, or should I say like 8 to 10th round range for me.
Yeah, see, like I would be comfortable like taking him as my tight end one. Let me look at what his ADP is. Um, let's figure out where this dude is at because
I mean, he's 12.
he's
He's
12th round right now over one player 156. He's going after Tyler Higbee. He's going after Tunyon. He's going after Hunter Henry. He's going after Gronk. Like, I would much rather have him than all those other names. I'd take him over Jonnu. Dallas Goedert would be interesting. That'd be a good discussion. Um,
I
but
don't
if
know
I
why
can,
people are all of a sudden sleeping on Dallas Goedert or Philadelphia's tight ends. Just like you
it's a
said at
weird
the beginning of the
situation. They love Jalen Hurts, but they hate Miles Sanders and Dallas Goedert. So I don't really understand.
well,
Like,
kind of like what you said about the San Francisco situation. If Trey Lance is playing quarterback, the young QB is going to lean on their most consistent and guy that's always open. So why are we not expecting Jalen Hurts in games that hopefully Philadelphia is not getting their ass whooped like they were at the end of last year, where they're funneling the ball to Goddard, who should see the lion's share of the work this season as they're kind of phasing Zach Ertz out and potentially
yeah,
trading or
I
cutting him
think
prior to
Ertz
the
is
season.
gone. That's another reason why I'm a little more optimistic. But yeah, he only played 11 games last year, so there was injury woes, so there was some frustration because he was one of the buzz players going into last year. Somebody that a lot
True.
of people were talking about as a guy who could take a tremendous step forward. A lot of people probably drafted him a little too early, and then were upset that he didn't quite live up to that. So oftentimes that kind of that will affect ADP, and I really try and take last year out of the mix. Obviously, it would if you see a player progressing or whatever, but um, yeah, I think that's everyone that Irv Smith is someone that I'm getting really excited about in Minnesota. I think that Vikings offense can be really fun, and
I've loved Irv
Jefferson.
Smith, but they throw to freaking Tyler Conklin. I mean, come on.
Yeah, yeah. Any later round dart throws that you think could be interesting? I know we both love Hayden Hurst, and in those stacks where I don't get Kyle Pitts with the Falcons guys, I've been adding him where I can. But is there any other names that you think, wow, this guy could be somebody that by midseason is a weekly starter and maybe finishes a top 10-ish guy?
Like I already mentioned him. I think that's
Jared
Jared
Cook.
Cook.
Yeah.
People are sleeping on the fact that Hunter Henry is no longer there, and they really think that Darnell Parham is going to be
Parham.
the freaking receiving tight end there. Yeah, he's big, but he's like cement shoes out there running. So Jared Cook has already shown it in multiple seasons that he is a receiving threat from the position. So I see him being used kind of in that like dynamic role, not necessarily lining up on the tackle, and instead using him for mismatches and going downfield to create separate like space for Allen and Mike Williams on the outside. So for me, it's got to be Jared Cook.
Yep, love that call, and I think I will be moving him up in my rankings after this discussion. If you're looking in deeper leagues or maybe two tight end leagues, Anthony Ferkser in Tennessee I think makes a ton of sense. Ryan Tannehill and him clearly have a rapport, and as much as as excited as I am about AJ Brown and adding Julio and all that good stuff, I think he is somebody that could make sense. And I also like. Why am I blanking? Adam Troutman in New Orleans.
It's hard
He's
for me to
somebody that
get
can
on
get,
him.
dude. I think that offense kind of in general is being underutilized, and I think there's going to be a lot of disappointed people when they pass on Kamara early, pass on Michael Thomas, pass on pieces in this offense because they think, oh, well, Drew Brees was a shell of himself the last 2 years. He was a waste. I think Jameis starts 16 games from a fantasy perspective could be awesome, could be completely awesome. Um, and if that happens, I think there's people eating. I think Kamara eats. I think Latavius eats, and I think Adam Troutman could be an interesting name. That like I said, I'm not saying draft him over Gesicki or Logan Thomas or Kyle Pitts, but as if you need a second tight end, if you are digging a little deeper, if you're in a 14, 16 team, deeper league, he's somebody that could make sense, as a tight end or as a deep flex.
Yeah, one more name I wanted to hit on before we get out of here, and that's got to be your guy from last year. That's Eric Ebron. I mean, he didn't produce the way that I think you thought he was going to last year, but he
No.
did show flashes. He had over 50 receptions last year. He had over 550 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns for a team that was dinking and dunking their way down the field. And the expectation going into this upcoming season is that Pittsburgh is going to elongate their passing scheme. Ben Roethlisberger is going to be fully healthy, get back to getting the ball down the field, and that's what Ebron does best. And
Yeah,
if we think that
I have so many questions because if you think about that team we both like Deontay Johnson. I like Chase Claypool. I like Juju. I think Juju is a tremendous value. I know I'm in on Najee Harris. Like at some point he's like what the 5th or 6th best option. I
hey, at
just
tight end 25 right
yeah
now, according to Fantasy Pros, like if he's sitting if he's your last guy that you pick and he's your second or third tight end, depending on how deep your roster is, there are going to be weeks where he's getting 5-6 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown. So
yeah. No, that's completely fair. Um All right, Brian Twining, this is fun. Got to talk to some tight ends. We have our other position previews up on our YouTube. These will also be on our podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, however you get the pod. Follow us at AOP Podcast on Instagram. I'll post our rankings over there so you can get a look at our top 12. And I will try and conjure up some stuff on the website as well so you can see our full rankings. I mean, I have the majority of my rankings done. I have some tiers set up, so I will try and get those up on the website ASAP so you can start prepping and getting your thoughts and plans together for the season. Obviously, we have about a good month before drafts really start going. The Scott Fish Bowl is just getting underway, so that's the start of fantasy season for me. So, yeah, poor Brian missed the boat this year, but that's okay, Brian.
that's all right.
We'll see if we can sneak in next year.
Some other lucky person got to play, and that's cool.
Yeah, Scott really tries to mix it up a lot when he can. So, for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.